In December 2023, Ghana made a global announcement. Its debt crisis was officially over after one of the largest domestic debt restructuring in Africa history and a $3 billion IMF bailout. The country was later declared back on track.
Congratulations to Ghana for a strong program of reforms to revitalize growth and reduce the country's debt burden.
Here is surprising a straight back. Price didn't fall. Jobs didn't multiply. Rents didn't suddenly become affordable. Many Ghanaian lives felt exactly the same or even harder. This is very confusing because Ghana follows the textbook solution. It cut spending, restructured bond worth over $30 billion, accepted painful reforms, and returned to the international market good book. By 2024, inflation dropped from over 50% in 2022 to around 23%. The cedi stopped free falling. On paper, this looked like success.
Let me take the opportunity to commend those of you who have responded to the cedi's appreciation.
So, why does the average person feel no relief after all this? This matters far beyond Ghana. Across Africa, countries like Zambia, Kenya, Egypt, and Nigeria are watching closely. Ghana was supposed to be the example. They prove that if you do everything right, things get better. If that promise is shaky, the whole debt reform story needs a rethinking. If Ghana's debt crisis truly ended, why are living costs still crushing people? Who actually benefits when a country exits a debt crisis? And is debt relief designed to fix African economies or just to stabilize them for the lenders? Stay with me because I will be providing answers to all these questions later on in this video. But before then, make sure to hit the subscription button and give this video a like because it actually costs you nothing to do so. When Ghana announced that its debt crisis has ended, many people imagined relief was coming very fast. Lower food prices, cheaper transport, more jobs. That is what everybody was expecting. After all, the country had just completed one of Africa's biggest debt restructuring. Not only that, it also secured a $3 billion IMF bailout in the year 2022. To understand why daily life did not improve, we need to understand what debt crisis ended actually means in practice, not on paper. By 2022, Ghana was spending more than half of government revenue just paying interest on debt. Public debt had climbed above 100% of GDP, which is extremely high for a developing economy like Ghana. The government could no longer borrow cheaply, and foreign investors had already pulled out of the country already. Inflation crossed 50%, and the cedi became one of the worst performing currencies in the world that year. Ending the crisis did not mean Ghana suddenly got money to spend. It means Ghana convinced creditors to accept losses or wait longer for a payment. That is what it means. Domestic bondholders, including pension funds and banks, were forced into a restructuring that reduced interest payment. External creditors were also told to expect less. From the IMF point of view, that was success. The government stopped bleeding cash. Inflation slows down, dropping to about 23% by 2024. The exchange rate became more stable. Ghana was no longer on the edge of financial collapse. But here is the catch. IMF programs are designed to stop economies from falling apart, not to make ordinary people comfortable. The condition attached to Ghana bailout requires spending cuts, higher taxes, and strict control of public wages. Fuel subsidies were reduced, electricity tariff increased, import costs stay high because cedi never returned to its old strength. Compare this to how debt crises play out in richer countries. During the 2008 financial crisis, the United States and European borrowed heavily to stimulate their economies. People lost jobs, yes, but governments also injected money to soften the pain. Ghana did the opposite as a developing African country. Ghana was forced by the IMF to shrink spending while the population was already struggling. So when leaders said crisis was over, they were speaking the language of lenders and credit rating agencies. On the street, the average man still suffers. Food prices in Kumasi still remain the same or even higher. So there's no way you can convince a trader in Kumasi that the country is stable. A graduate also does not feel recovery. When companies are still cutting costs and refusing to hire people, the crisis ended on paper. In real life, its effect were still very felt by the common people. One of the biggest questions people ask is simple. If inflation fell, why didn't price come down? The answer lies in how inflation worked and how fragile the Ghana economy had become before the crisis ended. When inflation dropped from 50% to 23%, prices are still rising. Just that they were rising slowly. That means food, rent, transport, and school fees remain expensive. Nothing automatically becomes cheaper. Take food import as an example. Ghana imports a large share of its rice, poultry, cooking oil, and wood. It is the same story with many African countries. When the cedi collapsed in 2022, importers pay far more for the same goods. So for them to survive, they raised the price of these goods sharply. So even after the currency stabilized, importers did not reduce price because their operating costs stay very high. Energy costs are another factor. As part of IMF conditions, Ghana adjusted electricity and fuel pricing to reflect market realities. In simple terms, subsidies were reduced. Of course, you all know tomatoes does not become cheaper when the cost of moving it from the farm to the market increase. Now compare Ghana to countries with strong industrial bases. When inflation slows in China or Vietnam, factories produce more goods, competition increases, and prices can fall. Ghana does not have that buffer. Manufacturing contributes less than 12% of GDP, and many goods are imported. So that limits how fast prices can adjust downward. There is also the banking problem. Ghana debt restructuring hurts local banks and pension funds. This institution became cautious. Lending slowed. Small businesses struggle to get credits to expand or to operate their business. Without access to loan, traders cannot expand, farmers cannot invest, and job creation stay weak. So while the macro numbers improve, the micro reality stays tight. The average man on the street still suffers. This is why many young Ghanaians feel disconnected from official economic updates. They hear about improved reserve and stronger fiscal discipline, but they live with high rent, unstable work, and shrinking purchasing power. The recovery Ghana experienced was a defensive war. It stopped the bleeding but did not build strength. It did not contribute to the economy. That difference explains why daily life feels unchanged in Ghana. To understand why nothing feels better, we must ask an uncomfortable question. Who gained the most from Ghana debt recovery? The biggest winners, of course, were not ordinary citizens. They were international lenders, credit rating agencies, and institutional investors who wanted stability, not prosperity. They wanted stability, not prosperity. Stability and prosperity are two different things. As Ghana entered the IMF program, it regained credibility. Foreign investors began watching again. Eurobond market reopened slowly. Multilateral lenders felt confident that Ghana would prioritize debt repayments. That is what they are just after. From their perspective, the system worked. The government also gained breathing room. It could plan budget without constant fear of default. Civil servants continued receiving salaries. The state avoided total collapse, which is not a small achievement, but ordinary people paid the adjustment cost. Domestic bondholders, including pension funds, lost values a whole lot in Ghana. So that affected retirees and future pensions. Public sector wages were frozen, while inflation remained high, reducing real income for Ghanaians. Youth unemployment stayed very high, especially among university graduates. Compare this to how debt relief worked for heavily indebted poor countries in the early 2000s. Back then, debt forgiveness came with room to invest in health, education, and infrastructure. Ghana's current deal is different. This raises a deeper issue in African geopolitics. Many African economies are integrated into global finance as debtors not as producers. Stability matters to lenders because it protects repayment, but stability alone does not create factories, farm, or jobs for the citizens. Ghana simply follow IMF instructions, and yet the reward was just survival, not transformation. This is the lesson many African countries are quietly learning. Ending a debt crisis is not the same as building a future for your country. Ghana's experience is not failure. It's a warning. It shows that Africa's economic problems are not just about bad government or corruption, but about how the global system defines success. And until that definition changes, many countries will keep recovering without feeling better, especially Africa developing countries. If an economy is truly recovered, people expect one thing first, that is job, not speeches, not report, real work that pay enough money for them to live. That is where the Ghana post-crisis story becomes very uncomfortable to the common man on the street. During the crisis, many companies shut down completely. Manufacturing firms reduced shifts, construction slowed, import-dependent businesses struggled because of the weak cedi. Unfortunately, when stability returns, those businesses did not rush to hire again. Why? Because recovery without confidence does not create jobs. Interest rates stayed high even after inflation cooled on paper. A small factory owner thinking about expanding has to ask, why take a loan with such heavy interest when demand is uncertain? Compare this with countries that recovered faster from financial crisis. After the 2019 pandemic, the United States cut interest rates close to zero and injected trillions into the economy. Companies in America then borrowed cheaply, they expanded quickly and rehired workers, all thanks to the stimulus they received from the American government. Ghana did the opposite as an African country. Another problem is structure. Ghana economy employs many people in informal work, trading, transport, and small services. These jobs depend on daily cash, not long-term investment. When prices rose and customers had less money to spend, their income shrank, their patronage reduced totally. Even after stability returned, customers did not suddenly become richer. Youth unemployment remained high because the sector that absorbed graduates, which is finance, construction, media, and the tech, were very cautious of employing. Many of those firms force hiring or offer short-term contracts instead of permanent jobs. There is also the issue of foreign investment. Investors care about stability, but they also care about profit. Ghana regained stability, yes, but energy costs remain very high, taxes increase, and local purchasing power weakened. So when people ask why jobs did not return, the answer is not laziness or lack of effort. The reason is that Ghana stabilized an economy that was not designed to absorb its growing rich population in the first place. Stability kept it from getting worse, but it did not create momentum. One of the IMF program's biggest achievement was calming the cedi. After losing over 60% of its value in 2022, the currency became more stable in 2023 and 2024. On papers, this was a major win, but stability is not the same as trust. For businesses and households, trust means believing that tomorrow will not undo today's plan. Many Ghanaians lost that trust during the crisis. Traders watched their savings evaporate. Salaried workers saw their income lose value every month. Importers were burned badly. Even after the cedi stabilized, people behaved differently. Businesses held onto cash. Families avoided long-term commitment. People preferred dollar savings when possible. That behavior slows recovery in Ghana. Compare this to countries with strong currencies. When inflation slows in Germany or Japan, people begin planning again. They started buying homes, expanding businesses, and investing long-term. In Ghana, memories of solid collapse were still very fresh. There is also a policy trust issue. Taxes were raised during the IMF program. New levies were introduced. Many people felt that they were paying more but seeing little improvements in the services. Roads, hospitals, and schools did not suddenly improve. When citizens did not trust that sacrifices leads to visible progress, patience runs out quickly. Currency stability also came at a cost. Foreign currency controls and import restrictions affected certain sectors. Some businesses struggled to access dollars, limiting their expansion. While headlines focused on a calmer exchange rate, the deeper story was psychological. Recovery needs belief. Ghana restored order, but belief takes much longer to build. That's just the truth. Ghana's experience is now studied across Africa, not in public speeches, but in finance ministries and central banks across Africa. Countries like Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, and Senegal are watching very closely. The lesson is now very clear to them. Debt treatment can stop collapse, but it does not guarantee growth. Ghana did many things right. It negotiated early. It avoided chaos. It kept institutions functioning. Compared to countries stuck in prolonged default, that matters a whole lot. But the deeper problem remains. African economies are often adjusted to satisfy global system, not local realities. Debt programs focus on repayment capacity, not job creation. They protect financial stability, not social stability. This creates a dangerous gap. Government celebrates recovery while citizens feel abandoned. Over time, that gap becomes political tension. Africa does not need endless borrow. It also cannot grow through austerity So without industrial policies, regional trade, and energy investment, debt relief become a pause button, not a restart. Let that sink. This is the truth African leaders need to accept. Ghana's story shows that recovery must be judged by employment, purchasing power, and opportunity, not just spreadsheets, not just headlines. The debt crisis ended in Ghana, but the development crisis did not. And that distinction is shaping Africa's next political and economic chapter, whether leaders admit it or not. There is a common belief that once an economy becomes stable, growth will automatically follow. Ghana's experience shows that this belief is not always like that. After Ghana's debt crisis cooled down, the economy grew but very slowly. It hovered around 2 to 3%, barely above the population growth. For a country with a young and expanding population, that is not enough to create a visible change. How come the economy did not grow speedily? One reason is that stability came with limits. Government spending was tightly controlled. Capital projects were delayed or scaled down. Private sector growth also struggled. Many Ghanaian businesses depend on government contract or consumer spending. When public spending is tight and households are stretched, businesses have little room to expand due to low patronage. Compare this with Asian economies that escape poverty. South Korea and Vietnam grew by exporting manufactured goods aggressively, even during tough times. Ghana still exports mostly raw materials such as gold, cocoa, and oil. These sectors generate revenue, but not enough jobs. Another issue is energy. Power cost in Ghana remains high compared to countries competing for the same factories. An investor choosing between Ghana, Morocco, or Vietnam look closely at electricity price. So stability arrived, but the engine of growth was missing. It is like fixing a car brakes, but never refueling the tank. Economic recovery stories often skip the human side. Ghana debt recovery came with social consequences that rarely appears in official reports. Health spending was constrained, hospitals faced shortages, patients paid more out of their pockets, families adjusted quietly, many reduced meals, some delayed school payments, and some were even homeless. Others relied more heavily on relatives abroad. Remittance became a lifeline, bringing in over $4 billion annually, sometimes more than the foreign direct investments to Ghana. Young people felt the pressure most. graduates accepted jobs far below their qualification. In Brazil or Indonesia, government expanded the welfare during downturns. Ghana had little space to do so. This creates frustration. People are told the economy is healing, but their life feels paused. Over time, that frustration turns into distrust, not just in leaders, but in economic advice itself. Over time, that frustration turns into distrust, not just in leaders, but in economic advice itself. Social pain does not show up in GDP figures, but it shapes policies, voting behaviors, and social stability in the country. Ghana as a country was never an exception. Economic recovery without visible improvement changes politics. In Ghana, debate shifted from optimism to blame. Who caused the crisis? Who negotiated badly? Who should carry the burden was a question a lot of Ghanaians were asking the government. Debt restructuring forced painful decisions, including calls that affected middle-class voters in the country. This reshaped political conversation ahead of elections, and this is something most African leaders always try to avoid at all costs. Across Africa, leaders watch this carefully. IMF-backed recoveries often weakens governments politically, even when they prevent collapse. Citizens remember the pain more than the prevention. Leaders know they need stability to govern, but stability without relief erodes trust. Some governments respond by delaying reforms, others borrow quietly again. A few gamble on alternative partner. Ghana's experience showed that political legitimacy depends not only on macro success, but on whether people feel movement in their lives.